Oh.
Aloha! Welcome to this week's video. So I'll be finishing up the koi today, or the adze. Adze? Yeah, adze. Still have quite a bit of work left to do on the blade. If you didn't see my last video, the blade is being shaped out of a piece of basalt. Traditionally in Hawaii, whenever they were making this type of shaping tool, or even some of their war clubs, oftentimes they would use really dense, very fine porous basalt, and it was found usually in higher elevations. If the lava rock dries too fast, you get really big air bubbles and poruses, and so it needs to be in a location where it's drying slower. This piece of basalt is not from Hawaii. It's actually from the mainland. Basalt's a pretty common rock, but getting a really dense piece is kind of hard to find. I ended up getting this piece from like a massage place. They were selling, like massage stones. So it's just a stone that I shaped up. Kind of just playing around with it here, just seeing how well it starts to chip. I haven't really sharpened it very much, but even a pretty dull section of it is still biting into the wood pretty impressively. And I'm holding that with my hand. So if I had a handle attached to it, obviously that gives you more leverage. You'd be able to do quite a bit more. I have the blade section mostly ground down. What I'm working on now are the sides. So what I'm going to be smoothing off is going to be the top section where it's curved. Only a small section of the bottom towards the blade, and then where the blade is angled, and then the sides. You can actually see it right there where the top part was shiny, the back part wasn't. I'm not going to be grinding down the back part. I want to leave it rough, and the reason for that is so that when I go to lash, it has a better grab. If it's too smooth, I'm kind of worried that it's just going to slide around, and so I want it to grab a little bit better. So now that I finished on the heavier or lower grit, really, I'm just moving down in grits. I actually don't know what the grit is of this that stone is. It just has fine, medium, rough. I think the fine's somewhere around probably 800 grit. It's kind of hard to tell. It might be closer to 1,000 grit on the fine. But I'm just sanding that first section off. So now that I have the stone pretty much finished, it's actually almost completely done. I'm now working on the handle. The handle's not going to take very long. I'm just putting in a 30-degree angle after doing a little bit of research on different adze as well as the Hawaiian koi. The 30-degree angle was a common angle, and so that's what I'm using. And then I'm just kind of making sure that it fits pretty snug. I am going to make probably a spacer that I can wedge into place, and that'll be used so that any gaps between the body of the handle and the blade, the stone head, have a nice firm and tight fit. Normally you would make the handle out of a branch, and where the branch meets the body of the tree, and so it has that natural curve, and then you would split the thicker section of the tree. I don't have a branch, so I'm cutting mine out of koa. I am making sure so that my grain goes long ways of the handle, and then the piece that I picked actually already had a compression spot, probably was from a branch actually, and so I used that section up towards where the blade is at. Now I'm just shaping it. Now one thing I do love about this piece of koa wood that I have here is it's a two-tone koa. And what I mean by that is you can see the lower grain, the lighter grain wood, and then the darker grain wood. And I love the two-tone koa. I decided, as I was shaping, I kind of decided I wanted to put in an inlay. I'd wanted to do it earlier, I just wasn't sure what style I was going to do. I decided to do round inlays. I have a template that I made a long time ago, and I just use that. What I do is I have a piece of tape stuck to one side of it, double-sided tape. I stick it to a large enough piece of blank that's white pearl and abalone pearl blanks, just chunks. And then I draw out with a fine pencil the template onto those blanks, and then I sand it off. And then on my workbench here, you can kind of see it there. I've got a small cutout where those blanks will fit into once they're the right dimension. And the reason why I do that is because that specific dimension fits one of my bits. So when I go to cut out, once I have it shaped, all I have to do is drill in a little bit in a bit, and I've got a nice snug, almost perfect fit for both of those rounded sections. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to drill a center hole all the way through the handle. The reason for that is so that I don't, it's kind of a cheat. So I don't have to measure and perfectly match both sides. What this will do is give me a center to match up where I need to drill on both sides, because I'm not going to drill this hole all the way through, obviously, because of the inlay. Those pearl sections are going to inlay into the piece, so they're only going to go as deep as they are flush with the top section. And so I'm going to drill out that first section, drill out the second section, and then I'm going to set them into place. They are a pretty decent fit, as in the tolerance is pretty close, and so I'm just going to be setting them in with some super glue. Both the abalone and the white pearl are porous, and then the wood is porous, and so the super glue actually holds pretty good, especially if your tolerances are nice and tight, and it just makes for a really nice hold. Now the pearl's a little bit harder than the coal wood, and so I'm using a metal file here just to bring down the pearl so that when I go to sand, it stays all level. Otherwise, what would happen is the wood is softer than the pearl, so it sands faster, and so you don't get a flush feeling to it. It kind of raises, so you have to grind that off first. It actually holds true with the coal wood itself. So the two-tone coal I mentioned before that I love has that same issue. You have to be careful when you sand it. So what this is here, you see that center section on that pad? So the pads, the grain pads that I use, I really like them. The 120 grit, the 150 grit aren't my favorites. They just don't bite as much. They last a while. They just don't have as good of a bite. They don't sand down as much. So I tried a new set of pads. I think those were Craftsman, and the pad just didn't last. After a very short period of time, that center section dug through, and I actually ended up messing up that center section of my disc sander. So that's just a waste of $20 because I bought a pack. But now I know those ones don't work very good, or at least the pads don't last. And so I'm going to stick with these for now. If anyone else has some suggestions, I'd love to hear what sanding pads you've worked with, what you like. I'm on the lookout for good ones for 100 grit, 120, 150 grit. The 220, the 320 work really good. They bite really well. They last a really long time. So I'm definitely not going to move away from those. But what I was saying with the two-tone on the wood here is so that the light koa there is actually the edge of, it's right next to the bark. And then the dark koa is more towards the center. And so you get hardness differences between that light koa and the dark koa. So it's really pretty, but it can make for sanding and shaping a little bit of a challenge because of the difference in the hardness of those two. But I do absolutely love the contrast. The contrast is just amazing. You can't quite see it yet. We're going to see it here in just a little bit. I'm almost done shaping and sanding this piece down to 320. But the curl on this is absolutely beautiful. Just gorgeous wood. So you can see here. Now the one thing that tung oil does with the lighter grain, and you can actually see in here, is it kind of darkens up lighter grain a little bit. But the contrast here is so great that you can still see a massive difference. The curl on this piece was absolutely gorgeous though. So on the back edge there, you can't really see it. That's more towards the center. So I think this actually came from a branch, which was perfect. But you can really see the curl, the compression curl up towards the head. And then you can see the curl that just goes all the way down the body. And then there's even some figure, those little lines of dark rings, the inner rings, as they go along the piece. So overall, even though it's a simple piece, just absolutely gorgeous. Love the way that it looked, loved the way that it oiled up. I'm really excited to get this piece finished. I'm almost done the last step here once I let this set. So I'll let this dry for about 24 hours. And then I'm going to go ahead and start lashing the blade, the stone head onto the body. So here this is out of coal wood. I'm making the wedge that I'll potentially use. I'm pretty much just grinding it down as thin as possible. I probably could make this a little bit easier with some other tooling, but I'm fairly comfortable with my angle grinder, so I can get it pretty thin and not go all the way through. So now that I have that ready in case I need it, I'm going to go ahead and start lashing this into place. It is a little bit awkward, and so I was kind of trying to think about what to do. I thought about putting a piece of double-sided tape, but I didn't like that, and so what I ended up doing was just using just a little bit of super glue and then pressing that into place, and it seized up really well. I think you can see there I'm actually putting pressure against it and it's still holding. I think the reason why it seized up so fast and why it works so well is because the basalt is porous. Even though it's a fine pour, it is still porous, and obviously the coal wood is porous, and so I think it just had a nice good hold. Obviously it's not a strong hold. It wouldn't hold up against doing any type of woodworking, but it'll hold it in place so that I can lash it, which is perfect. That's all I need it for. So the lash that I'm doing on here is I'm doing a crossover pattern on the top, and then it's holding both edges. I messed up this first time around. On the back end, the lashing goes towards the back, and the reason why I say I messed up with that is because it started to slide off. And the reason why is gripping good on the stone, but on the wood it's smoother, especially since I sanded it. And so that it's going from wide to thin, and because it's going from wide to thin, it started to kind of slide off as I was lashing. I just knew it wasn't going to work, so I went ahead and cut this off. I'm going to pull off this cordage here and then just start lashing again. I'm going to lash with the same pattern, so I'm going to do two differences. One is I'm going to put a front lash, and that's going to ride up against this ridge here. My big fat head is in the way. What this is going to do is it's going to give me 3 points of contact. So I'm going to have this front lashing that's going to hold into this ridge, then a crossover lashing that's going to hold on both the back and the front. So it'll give me 3 points, and then a final wrap around the handle. But instead of going from wider section to thinner section, now I'm going from thinner section to wider section. That way it's nice and tight, and as I move down the piece, it doesn't push out against it. And that worked out really well. Worked out quite a bit better. It took quite a while to lash this piece just because there's I just want to keep good tension as I'm moving across. But I really liked the darker cordage on this. I have a lighter cordage as well. I kind of played around with the lighter cordage at first. I didn't quite like it as much, and so I stuck with the darker cordage. And you can kind of see the pattern on the top. You'll get a better view of it a little bit later on. But that crossover pattern on the top, and now I'm doing that final wrap around the bottom. And then to finish it off, I'm just bringing in this tail and bringing it in through one of the wraps there and then knotting it. And so it's going to have a knot against that wrapping, and that should hold it pretty tight. And then I'm going to cut that tail off and then push it in underneath the lashing, and that'll finish off the wrapping for this piece. It's a fairly simple piece. Really, the most complex section was the head, was the blade. I wanted to try it out. I am being very cautious. I'm not hitting it very hard. I'm not using a lot of force. I really don't want to chip the blade. I don't think it would because I'm using the softer wood, but just in case, that'd be like a whole week's worth of shaping that I'd have to redo. But even so, it actually bit really well into this. You can see that. Now, I was an idiot. The piece of wood that I grabbed had paint on it, and so that paint got transferred onto, not wet paint, dry paint, but still it kind of got transferred onto the porous section of the bit. But I was able to just clean it off, and it didn't do any damage at all to the blade. So here's the finished piece inside of my workshop. Obviously, so you can see it's all cleaned up and looking good again. Looks absolutely beautiful. I love the contrast between the light koa, the dark koa, and then the pearl inlays on both sides of the handle. And then here is the original. So this is an archive image. I think it's from the 1800s. Also, of course, basalt, and you can kind of see the tree branch there. And then here is the piece in the natural light. Again, it's really bright. It's kind of hard to tell. I tried to get some shade on there, but you can really see the curl. You can see the lashing there, and as soon as I showed that on top. And then that basalt, that fine porous basalt, which took ages to shape. I can't imagine doing that by hand without any type of tooling. Oh man, that's very impressive craftsman. I hope you enjoyed that video. I really had a ton of fun working on this piece. This is the first koi I've ever made. I don't know if I'll ever make another one. It just took so long for the blade on top. If you liked it, please like and subscribe. Leave me any comments below. It really helps out a lot. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Aloha.